The wind whistles over the Elbe. Seagulls screech. Somewhere, metal strikes metal. Hamburg, gateway to the world, and sometimes the gateway to hell. When a container is opened in the harbor, Inspector Jan Arends discovers what no one should see. 12 dead abducted, concealed, forgotten. But anyone who digs too deep here risks more than their job. So grab a hot coffee, lean back, and if you like the northern air, leave a subscription. Otherwise, you'll miss the next wave. The fog hung heavy over the harbor, as if it had decided to swallow the morning. The light from the headlights refracted on the droplets in the air and settled like a cold film over the rusty cranes and agate. Everything smelled of diesel, salt, and metal. A smell that didn't go away, not even when the wind blew in from the sea. Jan Arends pulled up the collar of his jacket as he got out of the car. The silence down here was deceptive, muffled by the fog, but full of things that weren't supposed to be seen. Pierre lay at the edge of the terminal, where the containers Mamazou stood tightly packed together like colorless building blocks of a world that asked no question. 2 policemen stood at the barrier tape, their faces pale in the glow of the blue lights. A Port Authority employee held a cigarette between his fingers that had long since gone out. He looked as if he hadn't blinked in hours. Inspector, one of them muttered as Arends approached. You should take a look at this. He simply nodded and pulled on his gloves. The container stood open, half open, as if someone had stopped breathing in mid-movement. The number on the side had been painted over in dark paint. Below it, another one shimmered, barely legible but recognizable. Arends' gaze lingered on it. It was quiet inside. Not a sound, not a draft of wind, only the sweet smell of decay mixed with something chemical. Fertilizer, perhaps. Bodies lay huddled between the sacks. Men, women, a child, as if they had been trying to find space for air. One of the forensic investigators, a young man with a face that was too pale, stood next to him, clutching the report tightly. 12 people. No papers. We estimate they had been in here for at least 3 days. 3 days. Aaron's voice sounded hoarse. No one had heard or smelled anything. The containers are rarely opened before they are registered, and the man hesitated. They must have left him here on purpose. Aaron took a step back, breathing shallowly. He knew these faces, even if they were unfamiliar. Despair looked the same everywhere. He had seen them before, on messengers, in warehouses, in the files that were never completed. He turned to the customs officer. Where did he come from? Klaipeda, via Bremerhaven, then here. He was declared as an agricultural import. The man handed him a clipboard. Fertilizer. Everything neatly in the papers. Aaron skimmed through the freight list. The loading date made no sense. A signature at the bottom was indecipherable. A name, Krüger Nordhafen Logistics GmbH, Dodd. Do you know it? Aaron asked the group. Silence. Only the creaking of the harbor crane swaying in the wind. He wrote the name down in his notebook, closed his eyes briefly. The Klaipeda, Stade, Port of Hamburg. The trail led into a net that too many fingers had already touched. We have to check the serial number, he finally said. Not the one on the outside, the one engraved. A technician nodded and shone a flashlight into the dark corner of the container. After a while, he said, Here, but the number is painted over. On purpose? Terence leaned forward, ran over the cold metal surface. Who would do something like that? Someone who never wants the container to be found again. He straightened up and looked out into the fog. The roar of a ship's horn vibrated through the ground, dull, almost like a heartbeat. Somewhere far out, a freighter disappeared into the gray soup. Everything seemed to be moving. Only this place remained silent. An older policeman stepped up next to him. This is going to be big, right? Aaron's didn't answer right away. Depends on how many people want to look. He took a few steps, looked at the tracks that led into nothingness. The port was like a separate kingdom with its own laws, its own gods. Everything that no one should see disappeared here. I want everything you can find out about Nordhafen logistics. Owners, freight forwarders, contracts, staff, and check the route to Lask and the container. Understood. He pulled his collar even higher as the fog grew thicker. Above the cranes, the sky turned gray. Ships were heaving. Somewhere, metal was hitting metal. Everyday life in the harbor continued as if the container had never existed. Aaron stopped for a moment, looking at the dead bodies. A woman held the child in her arms, her face half hidden in the fabric of her jacket. He thought of the cold nights at sea, of the promises someone had made to them, and the price they had paid for it. He took his ID card out of his jacket pocket and looked at the LKA emblem. In that very moment, it felt heavy, as if he were carrying a burden that was far greater than the weight of his own military rank. As he walked back to the car, Holm called from the control center. Jan, we have something. The company is started. No current entries in the commercial register, but there are payments from a security service. Hansek, do you know them? Too well, he muttered. I'll drive there. He hung up, looked back one last time. The container stood there like a memorial made of steel. Silent, relentless. And somewhere in the darkness of the harbor, a story began that would have been better left untold. The light from the monitor was the only thing that lit up the room. A gray-blue shimmer on metal shelves, a quiet whirring fan. A pipe was dripping somewhere. The investigation team's office in the LKA Harbor Complex had been provisionally furnished. Cables on the floor, coffee cups next to piles of files. The smell of cold smoke and stale filter coffee hung in the air. Learholm sat hunched over at her computer. Her fingers flew over the keyboard. Precise, focused, almost silently. The darkness of her eyes reflected the screen. Next to her stood Jan Arens, his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the endless stream of numbers and letters running across the display. This is the container's digital manifesto, Holmes said without looking up. Her voice sounded calm, but with that quiet tension that she always had when she found something that didn't fit together. Officially, it was registered in Klaipeda as an agricultural import. After that, it went through 3 stations, but 2 of them don't appear in the systems. Error, Aaron's out. Holmes shook her head. No error. Manipulation. You hear. The container was registered in Bremerhaven on Wednesday, in Hamburg on Thursday. No trace in between, as if it had disappeared for 12 hours. Aaron stepped closer. 12 hours are enough to change all sorts of things. Cargo, number, destination, and to hide people, Holmeisa added quietly. A moment of silence. Only the hum of the computers, the ticking of the clock. Outside, the wind rustled over the documents, carrying the distant howl of a ship's horn. Aarons frowned. Who has access to the data? Officially, only Customs and Port Security. Virtually, anyone with the right contacts. He clicked deeper into the data. The last redeclaration took place in Altenwerder. There, the container was removed from the list of a Lithuanian transport company and assigned to a German freight forwarder. Nordhafen Logistics. Aaron's exhaled audibly. The ones from Stade. Exactly. And they signed their papers 5 days before the refugees died. Backdated. So the container was here long before anyone knew what was in it, or before anyone wanted to know what was in it. Holm leaned back, rubbing his temples. Someone went to great lengths to conceal the route. That only works if several parties are involved. Customs, terminal management, maybe even freight forwarders. Aarons nodded. He was familiar with it. These silent connections, where money was more important than the law. He looked at home, gave me the data from the Altenwerf terminal, license plate numbers and departure times. I want to know who was there that evening. Holm opened a new window, typed in commands. That takes a few minutes. He went to the window. Outside, the harbor lay in the gray rain. Stacks of containers like sluggish giants, cranes like squat skeletons against the sky. He loved and hated this place at the same time. He smelled of life and death, of departure and destruction. The door opened. A uniformed colleague, Jansen, came in, dripping, visibly nervous. Terrence, I have something. A warehouse worker from the terminal testified, saying he saw a black SUV with diplomatic license plates the evening before the find. 2 men, maybe 3, pulled up right at the pier. Diplomats? Aaron's voice immediately became harder. He says, yes, license plates, B02, Lithuanian or maybe Latvian. But he is not entirely sure about that yet. Holm looked up briefly. And what did Customs say about that? Jansen shrugged. Nothing, no confirmation, no video recording. The cameras in the area were supposedly being serviced. Aarons laughed quietly, without humor. Of course they were. And port security? Holm asked. Referring to ongoing investigations, Jansen replied, adjusting the collar of his jacket. In other words, they're not saying anything. Aarons looked at him, then at Holm. This is too smooth, too coordinated. Someone made sure that no one saw anything, no one heard anything. Holm leaned over the screen again. I can try to access the backup servers. There might be unedited data streams there. Just do that and make sure no one notices you're looking. Don't worry, she said shortly. He knew he could count on her. She was different from most. Precise, fearless, with that calmness she had brought with her from her time in the Bundeswehr. And yet, sometimes he saw the shadow in her eyes, the things she had seen there before she went to the police. An hour later, she had it here. She pointed to the monitor. The ID of the container had been overwritten twice, the last time from an IP address belonging to Hansa Security Center. Aaron's neck muscles tensed. On security service with a contract for several port areas, officially responsible for property protection and monitoring. Unofficially, they do what they are paid to do. Aaron's finished the sentence. Holm nodded. This was no coincidence. This was a transport that was supposed to go wrong from the start, or rather, it was allowed to go wrong. He remained silent, staring at the columns, figures that suddenly told him more than any testimony. Money flows, freight routes, false papers, all intertwined in a network of companies that provided mutual cover. Here, one hand fits into the other, he finally murmured. Holm looked up. And if you release the wrong one, the whole fist will know. Aaron looked out into the darkness that was encroaching on the harbor. Somewhere beyond the lights, someone was waiting for him to give up. But that had never been his style. Not in this life. Not while there were still unanswered questions. He took his notebook out of his jacket, wrote a word in it, Hansek. Then he snapped it shut. We're leaving for Stadler, he said. I want to know who this container really belonged to. Holm just nodded. There was a quiet light in her eyes, the sparkle of a woman who knew she had just uncovered something bigger than a murder case. Outside, the wind beat against the windows. The harbor was silent, but Jen Aarons knew that he had crossed a boundary beyond which nothing would ever be able to remain silent again. The country road to Stade stretched between orchards like a patient ribbon. In autumn, the trees were there, and nothing more than fruitless against the sky. Fog crept between the rows, settling like cotton wool over the field. Jan Aarons drove slowly. The headlights cut narrow paths through the dam. He didn't like this part of the world because It was too quiet. The kind of quiet that pretends everything is in its place, but it is actually just the calm before the next disaster. The Nordhafen Logistics GmbH shipping company lay inconspicuously behind a hedge of bushes. A low building, concrete windows with shutters. Behind it, in a small yard, stood an old van and 2 empty pallets. Stand still. The tracks that had once led past lay rusty and half overgrown, as if they had lost their purpose and retreated. Aaron's thought were the end of things that no one wanted to see anymore. He went to the door, took his ID. The reception area was sparse. A hallway, a counter, a desk lamp, coffee cups, and a calendar page on which the very same day had been crossed off not once but twice. A gesture of someone who had tried to maintain order, even though the Lortunians had torn. The name Hanno Kroger was written on the doorbell in businesslike typography. Kroger was the manager. He was already waiting. His shirt was ironed, his tie tied too tightly, his eyes red from lack of sleep or worry. In Aaron's experience, the two looked the same. Inspector Ahrens, said Kroger, extending his hand, which trembled slightly. He was of medium height, well-groomed, a man who had looked good in a business suit. But today he seemed shrunken, as if parts of his facade had been chipped off. This is my office, he added, and his voice sounded a bit too forced in its attempt at composure. Ahrens nodded. Mr. Kroger, I'll just take a few minutes. It's about the container from Kleipedur. The name made Kroger's eyes flicker. He shook his head, shrugged. We have nothing to do with such things. Our papers are clean. Everything is legal. I swear to you. His fingers nervously stroked the edge of the desk as if they could smooth out something there that could no longer be repaired. Ahrens looked at him. What we can do about this, Mr. Kroger, is with facts. I need to see your documents. The manifest, shipment documents, the vehicle handover documents. Completely normal procedure. Kruger nodded hastily. Of course, everything you need. The office was neat, tidy to the point of being untidy. Invoices lay in narrow stacks on a shelf, folders in a row, file numbers in neat handwriting. On the wall was an old harbor map. At the spot where Hamburg was, there was a small red dot with a circled northern harbor. It was a picture that claimed everything was still where it belonged. Ahrens' gaze fell on the desk. Beneath the invoices, half hidden under the thin edge of a small black thing, shimmered on the bank statement. Only a tiny part was visible. A metal ring, a slot, a USB stick. Hidden. Not under securities, not in the middle of the table. Hidden. As if someone had been unsure whether they even wanted it. He reached for it without causing a fuss. Kroger swore softly, as though he feared the inspector might destroy something of importance. This is Dick, Kroger stated. It contains personal notes, accounting records, which are certainly not intended for the press. Ars turned the stick between his fingers. No engraving, no logo, nothing. Just a piece of plastic that could possibly have anything on it. He put it in his jacket pocket, not in a computer, not for show. From experience, he knew that the device could either be harmless or ruinous. It was usually the latter. Mr. Kroger, he said then, without mentioning the stag. You said your papers are clean. That's reassuring. The only problem is sometimes papers are very clean and life has stains that aren't visible on the page. I need to know who was responsible for the envelopes, for the routes, for the handover. Names, signatures, every clue helps. Kroger swallowed. His eyes searched for an option, then the order of the gestures. I can show you my accountant's office. Everything is documented. We are transparent. Good. Ahrens' voice was sober. Then we'll go through this. They sat down at the large table, laid out papers. Kroger pulled open filing cabinets, pulled out folders, leafed through confirmations from freight for forwarders, freight invoices, bank transfer receipts. The handwriting was meticulous. Stamps, signatures, dates, everything as expected. But Aaron's gaze was hard. Over the many years, he had learned that gaps often lurked behind the sense of order, just like rats waiting within the walls. Home called. She was still in Hamburg, working remotely, but her voice was clear when she entered the room. Dan, I've issued the access logs, old calls, retroactive scans that we could find in the system. I'm collecting them. Keep the stick warm for me. Her tone was dry, half command, half joke. Kroger looked at her as if he had mistaken her for a mirror in which he was not welcome. Aaron smiled briefly, slid the stick under a folder. You don't have to. It's safe. He didn't want to keep the find from home. She would analyze every millimeter, but he also didn't want Kroger to notice. They spent the next few minutes with sorting through papers, invoices, numbers, stamps. Between two receipts, barely visible, Aaron found a note handwritten, an address in Klaipeda, a name, an abbreviation. It wasn't much, but enough to make a connection. As he held the note in his hand, he noticed how Kroger suddenly became more rigid, how the color drained from his face. How long have you been doing this? Kroger swallowed. Recently, I don't have access to the software. They sent us a software update, and suddenly the access was regulated differently. His voice was thin. I awarded contracts to Hanzek. That was necessary. We couldn't monitor everything ourselves. Hanzek repeated Aaron's thoughtfully. The name was familiar to him, a security service, widely ramified, with cover in many areas. It stuck like a pinprick in an already scratched wound. Kroger nodded. They installed cameras, patrolled, took over protocols. It brought us security. His hands ran across the table. I'm telling you, we have nothing to do with human trafficking. We're a small company. We have contracts, we have drivers, we have employees. We're not criminals. Aarons watched him. In the silence of the room, something oscillated between defense and despair. He believed Kroger in principle, that this man was not the leader of a large network. But there was mercy in the world of logistics. It was a chain of approvals, signed sheets, money flows. A small man could become a great helper with a false stamp. He turned away, took out the USB stick again. They said it was private. Let's see what's on it anyway. Just briefly, no drama. Kroger's gaze went to the spot where Aaron's had lifted the folder. For a heartbeat, something like panic appeared on his face. Please don't. It's private. But, Mr. Kruger, if we overlook something here, people's lives are in danger. I beg you. Cooperation is always better than concealment. He finally nodded, trembling, and pulled out an old laptop. The ports were yellow with dust. The screen showed stains of old deposits. They plugged it in. Holm typed it, shouted commands, opened it, waited. At first, only a list of file names flickered on the display. Then, behind a machine-like cool surface, lines appeared, fades, a structure that seemed like a memory. Names, routes, GPS coordinates. A few entries that looked like numbers could not be deciphered, encrypted. That's... Holm pulled his hand away and squinted. This is encrypted, and properly so. Someone didn't want this to be read. She dug her fingertips into the keyboard, shouted commands, tried to track down a key, search for metadata. If we can crack this open, we'll see names, routes, maybe even amounts. Aarons looked at the screen. The names were short, anonymous, but they existed. A list that referred to Klaipeda, to Bremerhaven, to places he knew. And in the middle of this cold technological world stood the name Nordhafen Logistics, written like a stamp on an invoice, as if it legitimized everything. Okay, he said quietly. Let's secure this. Make copies. I'll call for backup. We'll take the device as evidence and have external IT specialists take care of it. No half measures. Palm answered the order with a nod. She began to create an image of the stick. Professional software, error corrections, checksums. It was meticulous work. Meanwhile, the heart of the building beat quietly. A clock somewhere in the office ticked, keeping pace. The world kept turning. Then, while the copy was still running, the phone at reception rang. Kroger answered it, mumbled, listened. His face changed. Color evaded him. He hung up, looked at Aaron's with an expression that was somewhere between anger and sheer fear. What is it? Aaron asked shortly. Kroger was breathing heavily. He started with the okay, then paused. They said they had to come in immediately. You have orders, access restrictions. Higher authorities. Aaron's raised his eyebrows. Which authorities? You said the case was central. Kroger searched for words but couldn't find any. They'll be here soon. A queasy feeling crept up in Aaron's. If the LKA comes, we'll work together. There's no reason to lock us out. But as soon as he finished speaking, everything changed. A dull thud, footsteps in the hallway, voices, the kind that carry orders, and then, as the air changed in icy heaviness, two men in civilian clothes entered, followed by officers in dark blue uniforms. The man in charge wore the badge that meant more than rank. He carried rank and bureaucracy within him. Commissioner Ahrens, he said, introducing himself, but his words were sharp, not cordial. On behalf of the public prosecutor's office, we are taking over the access restrictions. The office is closed. No action until central instructions are issued. Ahrens' hand twitched. What are you basing this on? We're already in the process here. We are currently securing the bed and approval. The man barely nodded. As a precaution, you understand the procedure. The sentences were correct, but there was a whiff of power between them that had nothing to do with justice. It was the scent of a higher order that could grow without being accountable. Ahrens felt a line being drawn, not to the right or left, but upwards. He protested quietly, then louder. There was no use. Minutes were presented, signatures, official stamps. They took over. They locked things up. They gave orders. He was denied access. He had to watch as the men from the state criminal police office locked away boxes, took photos, filled bags with disposable gloves. Someone jammed the flash drive in a bubble wrap bag, tied a ribbon around it, and carried it away. This is my case, Aaron said, finally. I am responsible. It is my team, my job. The man in charge looked at him. Cool. The order comes from above. Keep calm, Commissioner. You will be informed. Ahrens felt something tighten inside him. Not anger alone, but rather the premonition of chess pieces being moved on a board while human lives served as game pieces. He did not want to move. He watched as the men in black and white striped shirts left the room, and only then did he hear the first whisper in the alley. Footsteps, a door slamming, a groan, then screams. People shouted. A load fell. Someone ran. Kroger was no longer in the office when the men from the state criminal police office sorted the papers. Nobody had seen him, they said. They rang the back door and found it unlocked. In the yard, a car with a tailgate open. No sign of it. They searched the building, the warehouse, the toilets, nothing. Then one of the men came back through the large gate, pale, his voice like a knife. There's something in the hall. It looks like they were running. Footsteps hit the concrete. The air was heavy as wax. In the back hall, between empty pallets and parked forklifts, and Kroger hung. One end of a rope was knotted around a girder, the other around his neck. His body swayed slightly, a living pendulum, in whose eyes a final restlessness flickered. His tongue was pale, his cheeks sunken. There was no farewell letter on the table, no note, no document, no farewell name, aim. Aaron stopped, as if a glance could stop him. He had seen suicides, desperate, cold, planned, but he had also seen murders that seemed like suicides. The world was full of tricks, and not everything that looked like an end was actually over. The man from the state criminal police office stood up, and the senior officer who had given the order exhaled like someone giving a signal. There is peace here. There is an end here. He ordered the forensics department. Crime scene. Everything was official now. Suddenly, as if the entry into force of a stamp had brought about the final decision. Aaron groped for words, for a feeling that made his throat tighten. No handwriting, no note, he asked. Nothing, said the forensics officer. No note, no surveillance in the immediate area, only the conductor tracks of the hall, no unusual traces in the surrounding area. He was pragmatic. Distant. Aaron went closer, looked at the body. Hunter Kroger seemed tiny in the hollow space. His hands were open, not cramping. His tie was not undone properly, but pressed together. There was a calmness on his face that seemed false. Aaron's instincts sparked red. He bent down, placed his hand on Kroger's forehead. It was still cool, but not frosty. He searched for the oath of a suicide. A gesture, a document, something that made it clear that this man had taken his life because he wanted to. There was nothing. His eyes found the table again, the USB stick, the half-finished copy. The stick was gone. The folder it had been lying under lay open, as if something had hastily knocked it aside. No sign of a struggle, no signs of a violent altercation. And yet, the missing device was like a finger pointing to a spot. Someone had been here who knew what was on the stick. Someone who needed it. Carr felt a twinge in his chest. Not dismay alone, but rather the certainty that things would not remain the same. The man of the state criminal police office worked routinely, putting up air tape, putting numbers in marked coffee cups. Kroger's wife would be notified, then the children, then the funeral procession, then the press, and the press. The matter would become a file, one morning's statistics. But Aaron's thought of the names on the flash drive, of the encrypted routes, of the list that had silenced the lives of 12 people with a few lines of order. He thought of the way one hand reached into the other, how a network of companies, services, and posts blocked the wind until no one could blow out anymore. He did not kneel down, did not get on his knees, did not wipe away his tears. There were no theatrical gestures here. Instead, he reached for his notebook, wrote down the date, wrote out the time and body audio, wrote the sentence. That would be like a legacy. Was no suicide note. USB missing? Suspicion of external interference possible. Then he stood up. The forensics team did work. Aaron stepped out of the hall into the fresh, cold air. The field smelled of damp wood and earth. The sky lay like a gray blanket over the tracks. A tractor drove in the distance as if the world were unaffected. He pulled out his cell phone, dialed a number, and let it ring twice. Holm answered breathlessly on the other end, as if she had suspected what was coming. Jean, get me the backup of the sticks and ask your contacts if anyone has blocked access to the Nordhafen servers, and make a note of one thing. When a man is hanging and a stick is missing, it is not a peaceful end. Holm was silent for a moment. Okay, I'll do that right away. Aarons put the phone away. He stood there, looking at the rusty tracks and images piled up in his head. A container, 12 dead people, a man hanging, a piece of technology that had disappeared. Someone was pulling the strings. Someone was pulling them with the ease of someone who knew that the law was behind them. He knew at that moment that stage was not the end. It was a stage, and that, however much he was blocked, he would not allow the truth to be suffocated in the files of a tall desk. The sky above the small cemetery instead was covered in lead-gray clouds that hung low over the fields. The wind smelled of earth, and old rain carried the smell of the nearby apple orchards with it, sweet and rotten at the same time. A small group of people stood around the open grave. Black coats, bowed heads, motionless faces. Donald Kroger's coffin slid slowly into the earth. No priest, no words. Only the creaking of the rope as it slid through the undertaker's hands. Van Aaron stood to one side, his collar turned up, a cigarette in his hand that had long since gone out. He watched the drops falling from the branches of the birch trees, heavy and steady, as if counting the seconds. Holmes stood next to him, silent, his hands deep in his pockets. No one from the company, she said quietly. He was alone, Aarons replied. Or you don't want to be seen when you say goodbye to him. He nodded. In such cases, those who knew something rarely came. Guilt sent no boundaries. Then he noticed a woman standing a little way off. Duck coat, blonde hair, blown loose by the wind, slender hands, holding an ostrich white crucinet. She was too young to belong to Kroger's family, too upright to be just a neighbor. Her gaze was not directed at the grave, but at Aarons. As the first of those present left, she stepped closer hesitantly. Mr. Aarons. Her voice was calm, but he could hear it trembling. He turned to her. Yes, and you are Mira Petrovich. She held out her hand to him. Her fingers were cold. I work for Mr. Kroger in the accounting department. Accounting? Aarons looked at her. Then you'll know what was going on in his accounts. She looked around as if she was afraid someone might be listening. Not here, but I know who's really sending the containers. Holmes stepped closer. What do you mean? Not Kruger. He was just a name. The orders came from above. Always the same companies, always the same routes, and the names on the papers. Some of them don't even exist. Aarons felt the air around them grow thicker. Can you prove that? Yes. I made copies on a flash drive. I wanted to give them to Kroger, but she broke off and looked over at the grave. I was too late. Where's the data now? Holmes asked. Wish, Mira replied. But not for long if they realize you've been talking to me. Who are you, Mira? Aarons asked. Honzek, she said quietly. They know everything. They don't secure anything. They check the containers, the cargo, the people. Holmes and Aarons exchanged a glance. I want to testify, Mira continued. But I need protection. I don't have any family here. I know what happens when you talk. You'll get protection, Aarons said immediately. I'll take you to Hamburg. We'll make it official. Today. She nodded hesitantly. Tonight. I have to get something first. I'll send someone with you, Holmes said. No. Mira's voice was suddenly sharp. The fewer people who know about this, the better. Aarons looked at her for a long time. There was no fear in her eyes, but that cold determination that only someone who has already lost too much has. Tonight, he finally said. Call me when you leave. No detours, no texts, just a call. She nodded. Then she walked away, her coat wrapped tightly around her, her head bowed. The wind blew the scent of wet earth and cold smoke towards her. Holm watched her go. Do you believe her? Aaron relit his cigarette at, I hope so. Because if not, we'll be the next ones to disappear. Later in the car, the rain began to fall. The gray of the day seemed to settle on everything. Holm worked on her laptop. The light from the screen reflected in her eyes. I checked her out, she said. Mayor Petraut, a Serbian citizen, has been in Germany for 5 years. No criminal record. And actually worked in Kroger's accounting department. She was officially fired 3 weeks ago for health reasons or because she knew too much, Ahrens muttered. Holm nodded. And there was something else. She had been in contact with a man named Ralph Dykhoff, managing director of Hansex Security. Ahrens straightened up. Dykhoff, of course. They spoke on the phone several times. The last conversation was the night before. Just before Kroger was dead. What did she say then? No idea, but the conversation was conducted over an encrypted channel. Military. Military? Han has executed. Do you remember? He remembered. Too well. Men who had learned to disappear and make others disappear. Then they'll know by now that Mira spoke, he said quietly. Holm was silent. Only the dripping rain on the windshield filled the pause. Ahrens reached for his cell phone. No message. No call. He looked at his watch. 7:38 p.m. She should have called long ago, he said. Holm typed on the keyboard, tracking her cell phone. A few seconds passed, then she raised her head. Rest stop on the A26 between Stad and Hamburg. The signal has been dead for an hour. Aaron started the car. The engine hummed, heavy and tired as the day. The rain turned to fog the closer she got to the motorway. At the rest stop, a few lights flickered, lonely, dim. A gas station attendant didn't look at them when they asked. The cell phone lay in the mud behind the guardrail. The display was shattered and cracked. Next to it was a crumpled piece of paper half soaked by the rain. Holm picked it up with tweezers. There was only one word left to read. Ahrens stared at the letters. The wind blew through the bare branches that jutted out over the road. A truck sped past, stirring up water which splashed in fine droplets all over his shoes as it drove by. You got them, Holmes said quietly. Ahrens didn't answer. He just stood there, his cell phone in his hand, the wet paper between his fingers, and felt the cold of the night eating into him. The port, he thought, doesn't just swallow a container. It swallows people, and sometimes it doesn't spit them out again. The handbag complex lay on the edge of the port, squeezed between cranes, container towers, and the grey ribbon of the Elbe. A fortress of glass and steel, sleek, anonymous, with cameras on every corner and fences that looked more like a military base than a security company. The lettering on the facade was simple. On Security GmbH. No advertising, no phone number, just power, encased in concrete. Ahrens and Holm had to register at the gate. Two men in dark suits checked their IDs before letting them through. Their movements were precise and deliberate, no ordinary security guard. Former soldiers, perhaps, like so many at Harnsek. The wind smelled of diesel and metal. The roar of a ship's engine vibrated through the floor. Friendly here, Holm muttered as they entered the lobby. Depends on which side of the gate you're on, Ahrens replied. Inside, a sterile coolness greeted them. Walls made of glass, gray, stone floors, quiet. Footsteps on rubber. No reception. No smile, just a security guard who led them wordlessly into the conference. Ralph Dykhoff kept them waiting. Ahrens thought deliberately. Power games never began with words, but with time. When Dykhoff finally appeared, it was as if someone had entered the room who already owned it. Tall, broad-shouldered, short cropped hair, weather-beaten face, the bearing of a man who was used to giving orders and obeying. X-Command Force that was written in his bones. He held out his hand to Aaron's. The grip was too firm. Inspector Aarons. Miss Holm. Welcome to Hansack. Aarons returned the handshake. He felt the coldness underneath. Thank you for your time, Mr. Deco. Of course, if the LKA has any questions, we're happy to help. A light smile, as smooth as the glass wall behind him. Holm switched on the recorder. We are interested in your contracts with the city of Hamburg and some of the wheel services, especially the transports via pier and ultimate. Decoff leaned back, clasped his hands. Hansack works on behalf of the city. We secure infrastructure, not containers. Our mandate ends at the port border. And yet, your company name appears in several logistics documents that are linked to the container from Klaipeda. Aarons replied calmly. How do you explain that? A twitch in Decoff's eyes, barely visible. Errors in data transmission happen all the time. We have many customers, including subcontractors. Things can get mixed up. 12 deaths are not a data error, Holmes said sharply. Decoff smiled thinly. We secure values, Ms. Holm, not people. Aarons looked at him for a long time. Values, he repeated quietly. Is that what you call it? I call it reality, Commissioner. We live in a world in which movement is money, and money is security. Our mission is to guarantee the security, not to question them. Aarons knew what that meant. Hansack wasn't just a security company. They were the invisible backbone of the port. Without them, nothing functioned. Neither cargo, nor information. Then you surely will not mind if we take a look at your internal processes, Aarons said. Oh, that would be difficult, Dykhoff replied, still maintaining a friendly tone. Our systems are subject to strict data protection and military structures, as you are aware. However, if you possess an official written request, Aarons stood up. We shall obtain it, even if I have to sign the document myself. Dykhoff smiled. Do exactly that, and please convey my greetings to your superior at the Interior Ministry. He is well acquainted with us. A sentence, seemingly spoken in passing, and yet like a knife, being slowly turned. Holm looked toward Aarons. In her gaze there was anger, but also a warning. They both knew that this matter was far greater than they had initially imagined. 2 days later, an abandoned warehouse stood in the southern port area. No sign, no lighting, only a metallic clanking sound when the wind beat against the heavy gate. Aarons and Holmes stood in the dark, only flashlights casting beams of light over rusty walls. Old shipping company signs, abandoned forklifts, dust in the air. Hans is said to have held training courses here in the past, Holmes whispered. I checked the GPS data from Krier's files. That matches. And you're sure we're not stepping on anyone's toes here, huh? I'm never 100% sure, she said. They found the control rooms on the upper floor. Old monitors, a tangle of cables. The air smelled of burnt plastic. Paul knelt down in front of a computer that was still connected to the power supply. The display flickered. This is a surveillance system, but not for the storage area. Aaron stepped closer. A live image from a camera appeared on the screen. Then several containers, cranes, vehicles, all in real time. Damn it, he muttered. This isn't training. This is surveillance. And here, said Holmes. She clicked. A new window opened. Pier 12, night shot. They rewound. On the screen is a container featuring the Baltic Freight Line's logo, the very same one that would later be opened by authorities in Hamburg. 3 men in Hansk uniforms pushed it to another position away from the official lines. No customs officers, no inspection. Then, a black SUV appeared. Diplomatic license plate. Aarons' pulse quickened. There we have it. That's exactly what I wanted to see. I'll download the data, Holmes said. Her fingers flew over the keyboard. Give me 2 minutes. Then a soft beep. The screen flickered and went dark. What the server connection lost, Holmes said. Someone deleted it. Remote. How fast? Seconds. She looked at him. Someone is watching us. A metallic noise from outside made them both freeze. Footsteps, then silence. Aarons drew his gun. Holmes switched off the flashlight. Only the distant honking of a container ship could be heard. A shadow moved outside the window, then another, then another. Aarons whispered, 2, maybe 3. Access blocked, Holmes whispered back. We have to get out. They crept to the side door. When they opened it, cold night air whipped in. Rain, the smell of rust and oil. Outside, in the light of the harbor lights, Aaron saw the SUV down. Same color, same numbers. Shit, Holmes said. Run! They ran across the yard, between containers. Behind them, a brief click. Metal, a fuse, then a dull thud. The side door of the warehouse flew open. 2 men stepped out, black clothes, balaclavas. Aarons and Holmes reached the fence, jumped, fell, continued, cooking. The rain-covered tracks, but the engine roar was getting closer. If you deleted the servers, Holmes gasped, then you know what we saw. Then we have to prove it before you can deny it, Aarons said. The SUV stopped abruptly, its headlights blinding them. For a moment, all was light, then darkness. When they reached the next street, Holmes stopped, breathless. Dykhoff will claim you broke in. Let them, Aarons said. But now we know what Hanzik is really doing. And Mira? She asked quietly. He looked out into the night, at the glowing cranes above the harbor, leaning over the water like silent witnesses. If she's still, he said, then she's our only evidence. In the distance, a ship's horn blared, long and deep, as if to warn the city. But Hamburg didn't listen. The city was too busy to get its assets, not its people. The police chief's office smelled of cheap perfume and old paper, a strange mixture that didn't fit in with the oily harbor winds at all. Through the high windows, you could see the domes of the city, a gray strip between the sky and the Elbe, everything a little blurry, as if behind a pane of rain. John Arendt sat in the visitor's seat, his hands folded, his tie loose, his shirt still damp at the collar from the rain. Across from him, in a leather executive chair, the police chief leaned back like a man who had learned to wear calm as power. Sit down, Commissioner. His voice was not loud, but it filled the room. The president was a medium-sized man with thinning hair and a face in which many decisions had already left deep furrows. He clasped his hands together, the fingertips touching as if they were secretly counting. You know why you are here. He spoke in a manner that was unhurried and unheard. John nodded. He knew it. The piles of files on the table, the news that had been flowing through the city like fine sand for days. Everything indicated that the matter was bigger than a commissioner could handle alone. But he had not come to hear excuses. He had come to look for answers. The president sighed. Listen to Aarons and call me by my first name. There are things that we should not take to the streets in the face of a sensible solution. He looked at him seriously. Keep your hands off, Hanzik. This is political. The 3 words hung heavy in the air, heavy as wet sails. Aaron looked at him and didn't smile. Political? He asked. 12 people are dead. This is not a political issue. This is a crime. That might be the case in an ideal world, The president shook his head. But unfortunately, we do not live in an ideal world. Hans has contracts with the city with wheels. You are involved in tenders that were agreed long before this event. Are you pulling too hard at this point? Are you pulling more than just a thread? Aarons felt a familiar shiver run through him. It was not the first time he had come up against a wall of interests that hid behind words like stability and securing the infrastructure. So, you want me to watch? The question came slowly, but it was razor sharp. I want you to consider the matter. The president seemed almost motherly, as if he wanted to explain the fine print of a dangerous contract. Think of your career, the cases, the resources of the house. And remember that every revelation comes at a price for you, for your colleagues, sometimes for the city. Aarons felt something tighten inside him. Career, colleagues, city. Words that served as arguments, but to him they reeked of cynicism. He stood up and walked a few steps up and down the room aisle. The twilight made the package shine like dark water. And what about justice? He asked finally. What about the people who died in that container? The president sighed again, more slowly this time. Justice is the goal, but we live in reality. Your investigations went into areas that we, he searched for the right word, must deal with in a different way. As Aarons left the room, he felt as if his shoulders had become a little heavier. Outside, a camera crew from a local station stood in puddles, trying to find the right mood for the news. The headlines had already been written. Tragic accident at the port, possibly illegal refugees. A reporter with a smile that was too broad wanted a statement. Aarons refused. Words were easy to form. Truth was not. The daily newspapers used the wording that had been then fed to them. There was an obvious league, and it was precise. Orderly, sober lines about illegally infiltrated migrants and tragic errors in logistics. Not a word about the disappearance of a witness, not a word about surveillance videos of containers being moved at night. The narrative was us, cold, terse, deadly. Back at the police station, Aarons closed the door behind him. The corridors were unchanged. The neon lights hummed as if nothing had happened. But he knew that something had shifted in terms of ideas. The departments that had supported him up to that point were beginning to hesitate. Phone calls that had previously been answered promptly went unanswered. Colleague Jansen, usually a rock, looked tense. He mumbled something about requests from the administration and feedback from higher-ups and moaned. Lear Holm, however, was still on fire. She looked at him, the cold fire in her eyes as always, when she decided not to give up. They're deep in it, she said. But if you want to stop us, then, we're on the right track. She'd already taken precautions. In her desk, not only were the usual work devices smoldering, she had two makeshift laptops, one with a mirrored system, a second, clean and inconspicuous like a normal work device, but cleaned and isolated. No connection to the internal servers, no metadata, just a pure uncompromising evidence collection. Her methods weren't exactly by the rule book. She knew that herself. But in these situations, she whispered, did you have to be creative? If they stop us, we'll ignore the system, she said, and put a hand on the keyboard. Unofficially, small circle, no digital footprints leading to us. Aaron looked at her. Her voice had that tone that came from her time in the Bundeswehr. Clear, determined, cold, calculating. There was no romance here, only pragmatism. He liked her for it, and at the same time, he was afraid of what that meant. The answer came quickly, not just in the form of words, but as a physical reaction. His office was searched. officially at a later date with the protocol number that was not shown to him at the beginning. A colleague of his who wanted to secure a copy of the surveillance footage was internally accused of having requested irrelevant data. Internal investigations were initiated, supposedly to rule out conflicts of interest, and again these insinuations. One should overshoot the marks. Then the threats began. At first there were anonymous emails. Simple, short, let it go. No signature, no address. In the world of modern fear, an empty threat is oft more effective than a shadow in the hallway. Once Adams found a note on his windshield. No writing, just a name. Nordhafen Logistics. No explanation, no direct threat. The meaning was clear enough. Holm had to experience how someone compromised her profile on social media. Private photos, small untruths, a framework to publicly discredit her. Mr. Ryan's colleagues were approached, pressured to appear for cooperation talks with the administration. Someone tapped the phone without a device being able to be located. The conversations they had seemed to hang on the commander's ear. Sometimes Aarons thought he heard footsteps outside his apartment door when he returned home late, or the quiet crackle of a transmitter indicating that someone wanted to know more about his movements. The pressure grew, invisible, but real, like a weight slowly pressing down on his chest. Colleagues who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with him were now whispering that loyalty also had its limits. The next career step could easily be blocked, they said. Why risk it? They asked. What do we want to gain? Aarons felt like two lives were at a crossroads stood, one that could be continued in the gray, regulated paths of the police world, calm, steady, with the prospect of promotion and a warm retirement, and another that called out to duty, truth, justice, paid dearly, possibly without recognition, with losses that were easier to count than to bear. One night, when the rain was scrubbing the city, his private telephone rang, not a number he recognized. He hesitated and finally picked up. Aarons. His voice was rough. You should pay attention. A strange voice, metallic, distant, as if spoken through a long tunnel. You hear too much, and too many ears are listening. Who are you? His fingers clenched around the phone. That's the wrong question. That click again. Then someone hung up. He slowly put the device down on the table. His hands barely trembled. He was a policeman, but he was also a human being. Policemen, too, had families, bills, years that one didn't want to see ruined. But then he thought of the faces in the container, of the child, of the women, of the men, of Mira, whose cell phone was lying in a puddle at the rest stop. And the wall inside him began to crack. Holmes stood next to him and looked at him without judging. We can hide, she said quietly. We can crawl away and wait. Or we can do what we always do. We collect evidence. We secure things. We leave a trail that no one can spit on anymore. And if we get caught, Aarons' voice was a whisper. Then we'll pay the price. She didn't say it heroically. It sounded matter of fact, pragmatic, like a bill that you pay because it's due. The decision wasn't made all at once that evening. It grew, as unresolved despair grows, quietly and inexorably. Aarons knew that he would no longer pray to those above Egan to give their blessing. He had seen too often how those above kept silent when silence was more convenient than action. The weeks that followed brought more pressure. An anonymous package delivered to Aaron's house, a photo of his son at a birthday party taken from a distance. The message was clear and disgusting. You're not just putting yourself in danger, you're putting everyone close to you in danger. Aarons tucked the message away in a drawer as cold and blunt as a knife handle. But something else was growing too. Determination. Small victories. Tom found fragments in backup blogs that linked Hanns Eisler to specific terminal servers. An anonymous dock worker whose face they would never read in the paper because he was afraid gave evidence of a black SUV and men abusing diplomatic numbers. There was nothing tangible, just sparks, but sparks ignite flames. By the end of this chapter, the situation was clear. The case wasn't just slipping away from Aaron's. It was being taken from him. Someone was trying to shape the story before it could be told. But the price of letting up was higher than the price of continuing. Aaron's knew there was no turning back. The decision stood before him like a path through a dark forest and he would dust, and he would take it, no matter what. He walked to the harbor alone at night. The cranes stabbed the sky like dark teeth, and the water glided past beneath them calm and relentless. Lights blinked in the distance. Container ships passed by like slow animals. He hunched his shoulders against the wind and heard the dull thumping inside him, which often felt like a heartbeat, but sometimes also like a weight. He picked up his phone, dialed the number of an old acquaintance, someone who was not on the official list, and said quietly, "We'll continue," but not in the way they thought. Quietly, well planned, no traces. At the end of the call, he hung up and looked out at the water. The city shook off the rain wordlessly, and somewhere, almost inaudibly, the machinery of what is called enlightenment began to move again, this time in the shadows. Leah Holm worked as if in trance, and the dim light of her screen text flickered, which for the past few hours had seemed like a sealed tank full of toxins. Until now. The USB stick, found among Hanno Kroger's papers, had proven to be the key, not with one blow, but rather with slow gnawing of the lever, which gradually loosened the rust. The encryption is tough, she muttered while the cursor blinked incessantly. Nothing standard stuff. Someone put some effort into it, but there are gaps. Backup fragments, timestamps, metadata. Whoever wrote the files did it in a hurry. Jan stood behind her, his hands buried in his coat pockets, his eyes fixed on the screen. He knew enough about technology to feel the weight of the moment. When Holm found something, it was rarely a coincidence. More often than not, it was the end of a long, carefully constructed house of lies, and the file that appeared first had an inconspicuous name, Manifest Final. When Holm opened it, a table spilled out onto the monitor. Rows, columns full of names, amounts, transport numbers, all neatly sorted, all designed for someone who does the math, not someone who sympathizes. "Look at this," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was something relentless in her eyes. Jan moved closer. One name after another appeared on the screen. Shipping companies, small and large wheel shipping companies. Yeah, Paraguay. Next to it, amounts that flowed like fat rivers through the table. Every 25,000 euros, then every 70,000 euro, 100,000. Amounts that together became a network. And next to them, container IDs, dates, ruins, routes. The accounting of a market, whispered Holm. Only here, not only goods are accounted for. People are items on a balance sheet. Jan felt a cold blow in his chest. He scrolled, names he recognized. Some old transport companies whose trucks he had often seen at the quays, names he didn't recognize, and in the middle of the list. And a familiar name. That's made his throat tighten. Ralph Dykhoff. Next to it, a sum of 55,000, and further down, as if it were the most normal thing in the world, was a name that hit him like a punch in the face. Marcus Weber. He read the name again, silently, like a mantra that refuses to go away. Marcus Weber, his former mentor, state counselor. Someone Jan had followed into the service years ago, who had opened doors for him and sold him dreams that smacked of a career. And next to that name, a series of notes. Internal Security Committee allocation infrastructure project internal security amount lines euro 100,000 euros 32,000 staggered over months. That can't be right, said Jan. His voice was no louder than a leaf blowing in a gust of wind. Vibine. Holm continued typing, running filters, pulling up reference files. This is not a one-off transfer. It's systematic. She pointed to a column in which account numbers and intended uses were listed. Money from committee funds that are officially intended for security technology and training. And here they are, redirected to private providers who then in turn serve subcontractor networks. Some payments end up in companies that are just mailboxes. The table began to take on a face, a system that treated migration not as a humanitarian problem, but as a commodity. People in containers, transports as accounting items, guardians of the infrastructure who decided what to do for money, seen and what remained hidden, all covered in the same fingerprints. Transfer America, Nordhafen references, wheel arrangements that in some places only existed on paper. Holmes scrolled on until index finger landed on a row of container IDs. Sir, here are these container IDs. They appear in several routes, Baltic ports, then Bremerhaven, then Hamburg. But the scans, which were supposed to document route by route, are missing at critical stages. Instead, there are notes for internally transferred special processing. These are codes for not checking. And who approves this? Jan stared at the column with the initials of the release. Letters, abbreviations. Some of them he traced back to an abbreviation that corresponded to a position in the Ministry of the Interior that was responsible for tenders. Other abbreviations were private, assigned to handbag managers. He felt a knot tighten in his chest. It was not only the absurdity of it all that weighed on him, but also the betrayal. The man he had assumed was standing with one hand in the pot, the contents of which were the dead from Pierre. Marcus Wieben, familiar, networked, in a position to direct money. The memory of conversations in smoky offices, of warm hands that had placed reassuringly on his back, became a cold hologram. In the meantime, Holm had opened more files. Contracts, screenshots of bank orders, confirmation. She placed them on top of each other, as if she were trying to put together a mosaic. They institutionalized the money, she said. Not just a few bribes. This is organized. They use public funds to finance private structures that in turn serve informal structures, and that's where people disappear. Was that their business? Jan asked quietly. Migration as a commodity? Some see migration as a risk to be managed, Holm replied. Others see it as a resource to be monetized. Black market labor, supply chain cheap hands, and a system that shares and disguises these things. She scrolled further and got stuck on a comment in a file, added in handwriting, obviously by someone on the inside. Concerns that public controls are not working. Diplomatic passports, double bookings, special terminal clearances. Next to a name, diplomatic route B02. Jan swallowed. The same signs that a warehouse worker had. The same ones that appeared on surveillance images. If that's true, he said, then we are not just dealing with criminal actors, but with a system that's operating from within works. Exactly, that's it, Holmes said. And that's what makes it so dangerous. Once institutions that are supposed to protect become part of the network, it's hardly a crime committed by individual parties anymore. It's a practice. He thought of a nodo, of the USB stick he had hidden under bills, of Mira Patro, whose cell phone had been found in a puddle in the dark. Of the 12 people in the container who had now become entries in these lines. Every time Jan read the list, anonymous paper turned to blood. It was bureaucracy that murdered. Baum exported the relevant lines in, encrypted them, stored copies in safe places, offline, printed out in envelopes that she didn't have time to keep. She distributed fragments to trusted contacts, those who were uncompromising enough not to be pushed aside immediately. A spark spread so that it couldn't be crushed to ashes by a single blow. "We have enough to show the money flowed," she said. "Not everything can be proven, not yet, but it is enough to raise questions, and questions are dangerous for people who do not want to threaten their world with questions." Jan nodded. He thought of Febon, of Dikov, of Hansek and their glass armor. He thought of all the paths a person could take to remain silent and survive, or to speak and fail. For far too many, there was no choice anymore. "We are bringing this to light," he said, "but we are doing it in a way that will not simply be swept away publicly. Accounts can be traced. Journalists must be given names. Checks must be formally initiated." Holm looked at him for a long time. "Publicity," she said, "is good, but one must be careful. If you turn on the light, anyone who has been operating in the dark will know exactly where to flee. We need a plan. Careful. And we need allies who will not look away when things get inconvenient for them." He thought of the press releases that had already circulated around the world, of the strokes of the pen with which the truth had been diffused into an accident. He thought of the police chief and his words of warning. He thought of how the system he was trying to expose was growing deeper than he had ever imagined. But as he looked at the list and went through the lines again, it became clear to him that the truth had a momentum of its own. Once made visible, it would not so easily return to the hiding place that had been created for it. "Then let's do it," he said finally. "We create allies, we create evidence, and we won't let what's written here end up as just another file on a desk." A ship's horn blared outside. The cranes drew black lines against the sky. The city continued to turn, bustling as if nothing had happened. But beneath their feet, in that spreadsheet, lay a skeleton of names and amounts. A skeleton that, once exposed, could no longer simply be closed. Bob up made another copy, closed the laptops, stowed the USB sticks in several places. Their movements were routine, but this time there was something of finality about them. They had the list. Now it was time to transform it into an instrument of justice, without knowing whose next hand would be that would want to crush it. The letter lay on his desk the next morning. No conversation, no accusation, no official interrogation, just a letter on thicker paper that smelled of a cold printer and cold resolution. Commissioner Jan Erens is relieved of his official duties with immediate effect. He is prohibited from carrying official equipment or identification until the internal investigation has been completed. Below it is the signature of the police chief. No greetings, no best regards, only the stamp in red, final. I sat there for a long time, staring at the paper, as if it might still change if one looked at it long enough. Then he folded it up and shoved it into his jacket pocket and stood up. His office was silent. The files lay on the shelves like little graves. The telephone was dead. Outside, a gray rain was gathering over the Elbe, turning the light into pale metal. He left. No goodbye, no explanation. Just a linoleum, the echo of his own dismissal. Baum was waiting in a small cafe on Taustrasse. She wore the hood pulled down low over her face, an old leather jacket that she usually only wore on her motorbike. She saw him coming, she put her coffee cup aside. So, she asked, suspended. Officially. For what? Unauthorized investigations, breach of official secrecy, uncooperative cooperation with the Presidium. And unofficially, because I was too close. Holm nodded, as if she knew. Then we are now officially unofficial. She picked up her backpack from the floor and pulled out a tablet. I continued on. About the last few days, the list led us to an address near Cookshaven. Safe house. Old fisherman's shelter, supposedly empty, but not empty. There's someone there. Mira. He felt something tighten in his chest. Not relief, more the dull feeling that it wouldn't end well. How safe is she? Safe enough that she's still alive, but she's scared and she wants to talk to you. They drove north through the muddy countryside, passing by gray villages and fields that were steaming under the cold, damp November air. The elbow was a leaden strip to their left, sea somewhere behind it, and visible, but noticeable, like a pressure on the back of his neck. The safe house was behind a dam, hidden between trees. A low map, red roof, crumbling plaster, windows with broken panes. Not a place you would find in an official register. Holm got out first, examined the grounds, then nodded. Inside, it smelled of cold smoke and damp. A kerosene lamp burned on the table next to it, a half-full teacup. Mayor Petrovich sat on a chair, her arms wrapped around her body as if she had to hold herself together. She was pale, haggard, her hair disheveled, but her eyes were alert, clear, suspicious. I knew they would come, she said quietly. Her voice had acquired the harsh tone of people who have not slept well. Marin sat down opposite her. They wanted to talk. She nodded, looked at Holm, then back at him. I have seen too much, understood too much. Get started, Holmes said gently. Mira took a deep breath. Also, it was never just a security company. They organized transports officially for cargo, machinery, spare parts. But at night, other containers arrived without customs, without papers. Inside, people, mostly from Eastern Europe, North Africa, men, sometimes women. They were distributed here. Warehouses, shipyards, construction sites, anywhere where cheap hands were needed. She paused. I was in scheduling. I saw the routes, the codes, the approvals. It all went through the same channels. Logistics companies, subcontractors, shell companies, and Hansek. They had control over the access points. No container left the port without her. Okay. And the container from Pierre, Aren's asked. Mira swallowed, her fingers trembling. That was a mistake. A delay. One of the drivers panicked. The people inside, they were supposed to continue to Stad, then get on a train to southern Germany. Workers for a shipyard. But the container stayed parked too long. The cooling system failed. It got hot, stuffy. They were screaming. Someone tried to open the door, but it was too late. And then she fell silent. Her voice broke off. Palm reached for a cigarette, lit it, and handed it to her. Mira took a drag. The smoke trembled in the air. Then came the order to seal everything. No trace, no papers, no witnesses. Hansek sealed the container and relabeled it as a fertilizer shipment. I saw it. I changed the manifest. They told me it was routine. And who gave the order? Aaron's asked. Mira looked at him. Dikov, but not alone. I heard names. Phone calls to someone from the authorities. A man they called the state counselor. Aaron's heart beat dully. Marcus Weber. She nodded slowly. Yes, I heard his voice once. I swear it. Outside, the wind roared across the dam. The house groaned. Holm looked at her watch. We have to secure the Hansack. Too late, Mira said tonelessly. They've known for a long time that I'm alive. I've noted movement, cars driving past the house at night. I wanted to leave, but where to? Ahrens leaned forward. We're taking you away. There are options. Witness protection. She laughed bitterly. You're suspended, Mr. Ahrens. I saw that on the news. You can't even listen to me officially. He was silent. She was right. He was nothing anymore. Not a detective, not a civil servant, just a man with too many truths in his pocket. Then we'll do it unofficially, Holmes said. I know people at the BK. Not everyone dances to the beat of the city. We'll take them to a contact point, but they have to give us everything. Every detail, every document they still have. Mira nodded slowly, tiredly. I have copies, hidden on an old laptop and on an SD card. Here, she whispered. She stood up, went to a cabinet, pulled out a loose board. Behind it lay a small black card. If I disappear, at least this should stay. Ahrens took the card. A piece of plastic, barely the size of a fingernail, and yet as heavy as a judgment. Later, when they had put Mira to bed, Ahrens and Holman sat outside the house. The wind smelled of salt and cold. Somewhere in the distance, the light of a lighthouse flashed. They'll hunt us down, Holmes said quietly. Not just Hansk, but also internally. If they notice that you're still working, then that's the end of your career, he interrupted. But that's it anyway. Holm looked at him, her face half in the dark. So what do we do now? Ahrens took a deep breath of cold air. We'll take Mira to a safe place and then we'll publish what we have. Not through the authorities, not through press conferences. Directly, uncensored. That will ruin you. Me, perhaps, but not the truth. They were silent. The wind beat against the house. The waves crashed against the dike. Inside, Mira woke up briefly. She looked out of the window, saw the two silhouettes standing in the twilight, and knew that they had long since crossed the border that neither of them would ever be able to return across. That night, Jan Ahrens decided that he was no longer a policeman. He was a witness. And witnesses often disappear faster than they are found. The storm came overnight. It raged up from the North Sea like an animal that had been chained up for too long. The sky hung heavy over the mouth of the Elbe, leaden gray, torn apart by gusts of wind that tore water and mud into the air. The ferry stopped operating. Even the giant container ships lay still, moored like giant whales, waiting for their end. Don Ahrens drove, his hands firmly on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road, which now consisted only of wind and rain. Water sprayed across the windshield. The windshield wipers could barely cope with what the sky was forcing upon. Next to him sat Holm, pale and focused, a map on his lap, the tablet flickering in the light. In the back seat, Mira Petrovich was wrapped in a blanket, her face pale, her eyes open, sleepless. How much further? Holmes shouted against the storm. 20 minutes, Ahrens shouted back, if the road holds. And if it doesn't, he didn't answer. He knew what she meant. The water was already creeping over the quayside. The gusts of wind shook the car like a fist. They wanted to take Mira to an old police contact, a former colleague from Kiel who had quit her job after an internal affair, but who maintained connections to a network of journalists and NGOs. People who were willing to do what the authorities refused to do, talk. But the storm wasn't the only thing I put in their way. Holm had received a message that morning, encrypted, anonymous. Just 3 words. You know it. Since then, Ahrens knew that they were no longer alone. The road led them down to an old dock area, abandoned, half-flooded, with rusty cranes whose arms moved in the wind as if they wanted to grab the air. The sea stood between the warehouses. We have to go through here. The bridge is closed. It's the only way to the northeast. Aarons nodded, slammed on the brakes. We'll run the rest of the way. In this storm, in the car, we're targets. He opened the door and the wind almost ripped it out of his hand. Rain lashed against his face, sharp as splinters. He helped Mira out. She clung to his shoulder. Holm followed, the doublet pressed tightly to his chest, under his jacket. Up ahead, she shouted. The warehouse. We can wait there until it calms down. They ran, ducking against the wind, fighting their way forward, meter by meter. The storm roared. The rain beat in their faces, and water sloshed over concrete beneath their feet. Then a noise that didn't belong in the storm. A short, sharp sound. Metallic, dry. A gunshot. Holm turned around. Get down, she screamed. The bullet hit the concrete. Sparks flew. Aaron's dragged Mira behind a container. His heart was racing. Another shot. Then two. Damn it, Holm whispered. They're here. Silhouettes could be seen through the whipping air. 3, maybe 4 men, dressed in black, with hoods. One held a rifle. The others moved quickly in a coordinated manner. No gangsters. Professionals. Hansek. We found them. Aaron's gasped. Holm reloaded her weapon. Because they never lost us. They fired back. The bang was lost in the storm. Dull as a heartbeat underwater. Bullets hit the container walls, hissed through the rain. Mira ducked, pressed against the cold metal wall, her face buried in her arms. Aaron screamed her name, but the wind swallowed the words. He saw Holm throw herself over a puddle, her arm outstretched to get a line of sight. 2 shots, 1 hit. One of the attackers fell into the water, disappeared. But then, a bright flash, a dull thud. Holm screamed, fell backwards. Blood stained the rain dark. Leah! Aaron's crawled to her, ripped open his jacket, pressed it against the wound. I'm okay, she gasped. Run, take her. Go. No chance. I'll cover you. Another shot. Mira screamed, staggered, clutched her chest. Blood seeped through her fingers. She fell against the container, slowly as if in slow motion. Aaron's caught her, but her body was already limp. Her eyes looked at him as if she wanted to say something more. Not let her say nothing more. The wind howled across the dock, carrying her last words away, tearing them apart in the rain. Aaron's felt anger, not a loud, burning anger, but the cold, clear kind that comes when everything else has turned to dust. He reached for the SD card in his pocket, Mira's last fuse, then for Holm's arm. Come on, he said. Let's go. She was shaking, her face pale, but she nodded. If we can make it to the shed, we can make it to the rest. They ran. Bullets slammed into metal, hissed into the water. The storm raged, whipping spray across the dock, driving clouds of fog before it. Aaron swore open a door and pushed Holm inside. The room was dark, full of abandoned machinery. He pressed himself against the wall, breathing heavily. Outside, footsteps, voices, orders. Holm crouched on the floor, bleeding, his gun still in his hand. None, she whispered. The list? You have to get it out. Not without you. If you stay, it will all be in vain. He knew she was right. He wanted to argue, but her eyes told him that there was no more time for vanity, for loyalty, for guilt. He gripped the card tighter. I'll be back, he said. Holmes smiled wearily. Don't do that. Run! He ran. Out of the warehouse, through rain and wind, over concrete, over cables, over water. The voices behind him grew louder, then quieter again. The storm swallowed them like an animal that tolerates no witnesses. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to keep running. Every step was a blow, every breath salt. The SD card stuck to his skin warm, alive. When he reached the dam, the sky was a single roaring mass. Water rose over the edge, soaking into his shoes. He stopped, turned around once more. The warehouse was nothing but a shadow. No light, no gunshot, only wind, home, Mira, two names that now meant more than all the files in this city. Aarons took a deep breath, then continued on his way. He no longer had a badge, no service number, no authority behind him. Only a truth that bled. He would publish the list, or he would die before he lost it. Behind him, a final flash of lightning tore through the sky, and the Elbe, black and agitated, he took with him everything that had once been certain. A year has passed. The wind has changed, but not the sound. It carries the same salty heaviness across the land, the same distant howling of sirens that creeps into the nights like a guilty conscience. When the fog rises from the Elbe and creeps over the fruit trees, it sounds like a memory that one wanted to forget, but cannot. Jan Ahrens now lives on the outskirts of the city, where the Schwinge flows lazily through the marshland. The small house is old, weathered, the wood gray from the wind, the paint on the window frames peeling off. No one would suspect a former LKA commissioner here. No one who is still looking for something. He has settled into the silence. The uniform has long since been hung up in the closet. The badge lies in a drawer, together with an old photo of Liam and an empty cartridge that he found that evening at the dock. Sometimes he takes it out, turns it between his fingers, feels the weight that weighs nothing, and yet means everything. The days pass slowly. He gets up early, makes coffee, looks out over the fields, where fog hangs over the ditches like a torn cloth. At noon, he goes to the river, watches the fishermen. Sometimes he goes out for a short ride in his old boat. He hardly speaks. The neighbors greet him politely, but know little. They say he is a former police officer who saw something bad. And that is true. The newspaper is lying on the kitchen table. Hamburger Abendblatt, morning edition. On page 3, in the bottom corner, a short article on security files for insolvency. The private security company, a partner of the Hanseatic of Hamburg and several law firms for many years, has filed for bankruptcy due to financial difficulties. The investigation has been discontinued. They said no further details. Ahrens read the lines twice. No names, no responsibility. No word about Mir Petroitz, about the dead refugees, about Leah Holm, whose name never appeared in any report. Just paper, printed with half-truths that are supposed to sound good. He folds the newspaper, puts it aside, then walks away. He steps out onto the narrow jetty behind the house. The water smells of metal and salt, of what remains when people want too much. In the distance, the lights of the harbor flash, tiny, flickering dots on the horizon. The wind carries a deep, distant roar, the dull echo of cranes, striking metal against metal. Ahrens closes his eyes, and there they are again, the sounds he will never forget. The squeaking of the container rollers, the clicking of the seals, the dull, stifled thud of metal that no one wanted to hear. He opens his eyes again. The containers roll on. Only the names on them have changed. Inside, the laptop is waiting. It stands on the old kitchen table among notes, newspaper clippings, a half-empty bottle of whiskey. The light from the desk lamp is yellow, warm, and yet it seems cold in this quiet kitchen. Ahrens sits down. The chair creaks. On the screen is a blank document. The cursor blinks, demandingly. like a heartbeat. He takes a deep breath. Then he begins to write. My name is Jan Arens. Until a year ago, I was a detective at the Hamburg State Criminal Police Office. I am writing these lines because I have remained silent for too long. It is about people who have no voice, about a port that swallows up more than just ships. It is about money, power, and the silence that protects them. He continues typing, word by word, slowly but surely. No file numbers, no paragraphs, no superior breathing down his neck. Just the truth. Raw, unvarnished, dangerous. Outside, the wind rustles as if it wants to blow the words away before they are finished. Irvins hears the distant thunder of the container ships, the soft squeak of the rails. The port never sleeps. He knows that what he's doing now could put him in danger again. But he has nothing left to lose, and has seen too much to continue to remain silent. In a corner of the kitchen, the clock ticks. With every stroke, the night grows darker, denser, more honest. He writes until the morning dawns. The first seagull cries above the wing. The water glitters silver. Arens leans back and reads what he has written. A beginning, not an end. He saves the document, sends a copy to an old contact address, encrypted and anonymous, in a letter. Then he closes the laptop. He stands up and goes to the window. The fog has cleared, and the first light lies over the fields. For a moment he thinks he hears Holmes' voice again. If you want to stop us, then you know we are right. Terence smiles, not out of joy, but out of defiance. He knows that truth takes time, and that sometimes it only survives if someone continues to write it. The wind carries the distant calls of the ships across. Arens takes his coffee, sits down again, then opens the document again. This time he is not writing as a detective, but as a human being, as a witness, as someone who has decided never to remain silent. And while the harbor slowly awakens outside, Jan Arens continues typing, sentence by sentence, against forgetting, against the system, for Mira, for Leia, for those who had no names in the containers. The cursor blinks, and the story of Nordhafen begins anew.